It's a big surprise. Nobody thought the ocean was this deep. So all of a sudden we've got scientists saying, why is that?
They sent a single camera 7 miles down into the Mariana Trench, into a darkness that has not seen sunlight in billions of years, into pressure that turns steel into paste, expecting to film nothing.
Is it a little hole? Is it a big hole? What kind of feature is it down there? There's a whole lot of questions you get when you find this one spectacular reading.
Victor Vescovo is folded inside a titanium sphere barely wider than his shoulders, listening to the slow tick of metal contracting against 16,000 pounds of force per square inch. On the support ship above, a researcher leans toward the 4K monitor as the exterior lights of the DSV Limiting Factor cut into the black. She watches for a long moment, and in that moment, the first thought that crosses her mind is the one no one on that vessel is prepared to face, that it should not be there. What the lights revealed. It wasn't bacteria, it wasn't sediment, it was movement. Complex, directional, purposeful movement in a place the textbooks had classified as a graveyard. The Mariana Trench reaches roughly 36,000 feet at its lowest point, a place called Challenger Deep. If Mount Everest were dropped into that trench, its peak would still sit over a mile beneath the ocean's surface. The pressure down there exceeds 16,000 pounds per square inch. No sunlight has reached the floor in billions of years. Temperature hovers just above freezing. Food is nearly non-existent. For most of scientific history, the conclusion was simple. Nothing meaningful lives there. In May of 2019, Victor Vescovo climbed into the DSV Limiting Factor and began a 4-hour descent into absolute darkness, part of the Five Deeps expedition, a mission to reach the deepest point in each of the world's 5 oceans. The sphere he was strapped inside is barely wide enough to turn his shoulders. There are no real windows, only thick acrylic viewports the size of a dinner plate. The walls cool as he sinks. His breath fogs the inside of the port. The descent rate is roughly 3 feet per second, and the water above him is getting heavier with every one of those feet. By the time the depth gauge reads 35,853 feet, the titanium around him is bearing the weight of roughly 8 elephants on every square inch of its surface. Any crack, any weld, any imperfection in the hull would disintegrate. He would be gone before his brain registered the sound. Deep holds a special place for anyone involved in oceanography because it is, in a way, the inverse of Mount Everest. It is the deepest point. It is actually deeper than Mount Everest is high, and the conditions there are just incredibly difficult to put mechanical devices or a living human being. He flips the exterior lights on the pressure drop above. The monitor goes white for a fraction of a second as the cameras adjust. Then the image resolves, and the researchers crowded around the feed expected to record emptiness, sediment, maybe a microbial film, the absence of life confirming what their professors had taught them for decades. What they recorded instead didn't confirm the expected emptiness. It demolished it. The first thing the camera showed within 2 minutes of the lights coming on, the model was already wrong. Amphipods, shrimp-like crustaceans, were already swarming around bait the team had placed on the seafloor. Not scattered individuals picking cautiously at scraps. Clouds of them, moving fast and aggressively, jostling for access, competing the way animals compete in any functioning ecosystem on Earth. Here is the part that should have ended the textbook debate right there. Individual amphipods on the feed measured several inches long. Shallow water amphipods, the kind you would scrape off a tide pool in Oregon, measure a fraction of an inch. The specimens on camera were giants, in a place where giants were not supposed to be possible, behaving as if nothing about their situation required any special effort at all. Sea cucumbers moved across the sediment surface, substantial animals, some measuring over a foot long, crawling with clear purpose, feeding on organic material in the mud, not specks under a microscope. A foot long, deliberate, moving through conditions that should make complex locomotion biologically impossible. And then the fish, actual vertebrates, swimming at a depth where the pressure was supposed to prevent any complex body structure from remaining intact. The snailfish captured on camera at depths exceeding 26,000 feet were 8 to 10 inches long, translucent and gelatinous, with small eyes and delicate fins, functional digestive systems, well-developed sensory systems, muscular bodies built for active movement. They weren't drifting. They weren't barely holding together. They were hunting. Let that sink in for a second. Snailfish have a spine. They have a brain, a complete circulatory system, a liver, kidneys, eyes. Every one of those organs is made of proteins. Proteins that pressure at any significant depth should be distorting and destroying. And a vertebrate with that level of biological complexity was not only alive at 26,000 feet, it was chasing prey. The bumpy snailfish doesn't just look cute, it is built for survival, with specialized proteins for high-pressure life and even a second set of jaws in its throat for eating crustaceans. One of the scientists watching the monitor on the pressure drop reportedly turned away from the screen, sat down, and didn't speak for several minutes because what had just appeared on that feed was not a data point that fit the existing model. It was a direct contradiction of it. How this is possible. Okay, here is the part nobody teaches you in school. Those fish aren't resisting the pressure. They aren't fighting it off. They aren't enduring it. Their bodies are mostly water, and water is essentially incompressible. The pressure outside is matched by the pressure inside, cell by cell, atom by atom, in perfect balance. They don't feel crushed any more than you feel the 14 pounds of air currently pressing down on every square inch of your skin. You don't notice your own atmosphere, they don't notice theirs. Now, for those who don't know, the real problem at depth isn't getting squished, it is chemistry. Proteins have to stay folded in exactly the right shape. A tiny warp, and they stop working. Cell membranes have to stay fluid enough for molecules to slip through, even in near-freezing water. Every enzyme that powers every living cell has to keep functioning under conditions pressure would normally scramble. And here is how these animals solved it. Their proteins have slightly different molecular shapes, stable under pressure where ours would deform. Their cell membranes include specific lipids that stay flexible at depth rather than stiffening up. Their enzymes are pressure-adapted variants of the exact same enzymes running inside your body right now, and they carry a chemical called trimethylamine N-oxide, or TMAO, a small molecule that props proteins up when pressure tries to collapse them. Shallow fish have almost none of it. Go deeper, there is more. Go deeper still, there is more again. By the time you reach the floor of the Mariana Trench, TMAO concentrations appear to approach a theoretical ceiling. Some researchers believe this is why 8,200 meters is a natural depth limit for fish. Below that line, the very molecule that saves their biology begins to run out of room to save it. Not exotic chemistry, not alien biology. Small refinements to a toolkit life has been quietly using for billions of years. And this is the part that makes the Mariana Trench footage genuinely disturbing. Life didn't need to invent new machinery to occupy the bottom of the ocean. It just had to tweak what it already had, which means every environment we wrote off as too extreme, too crushing, too cold, too dark deserves a second look. And what we found in there was a population of Mariana snailfish, which was interesting because that particular deep area is physically partitioned from the next area, and this particular population of fish don't seem to have the capacity for going shallow enough to get from one to the other. So one of the questions we are looking at is how connected these populations really are. The deep subsurface of Earth, the oceans believed to exist beneath the ice shells of Europa and Enceladus, planets we cataloged as sterile without asking whether life could adapt its way in. The search for extraterrestrial life has always assumed life requires specific conditions: the right temperature, the right chemistry, liquid water at the right pressure. The footage from the limiting factor suggests the list of right conditions is much longer than we thought. Life doesn't need what we think it needs what it can adapt to, and the evidence now says it can adapt to almost anything. If the kind of discovery that rewrites textbooks is something you want to follow, now is the moment to subscribe, because the next few minutes get worse. Not one species, dozens. Scientists willing to entertain the possibility of some life at extreme depth had imagined a biological monoculture. One or two highly specialized organisms occupying a single narrow niche, barely hanging on, doing nothing more complicated than not dying. What the cameras documented was something structurally different. Multiple species of amphipods, not just one, with different body forms and different feeding behaviors. Several species of sea cucumbers using distinct locomotion strategies. Multiple snailfish species adapted to different depth ranges within the trench. Polychaete worms, isopods, other organisms still being identified and cataloged from the footage. And layered across all of it, ecological roles. Predators hunting, scavengers consuming what the predators left behind, filter feeders processing the water column, organisms breaking down organic material in the sediment. Not a simple system where everything competes for the same scarce resource. A food web, a structured, layered community of organisms occupying distinct roles, operating under pressure that was supposed to make every link in that chain impossible. The same basic organization as a coral reef, a forest, or any other complex biological community on Earth, rebuilt from the ground up in an environment that science had classified as essentially sterile. The rules of ecology don't disappear at depth. They persist, life follows them, and it organizes itself in the same patterns it follows everywhere else on the planet. Specialization, competition, cooperation, predation. The exact mechanics a biology student would recognize from any undergraduate textbook, reproduced at pressures and in darkness that should have shut the entire process down before it started. And here is the detail that should keep you up at night. The footage covered a few dozen square yards of seafloor, a tiny, almost negligible fraction of the total available habitat. The full Hadal zone, the depth range below 20,000 feet, spans approximately 45,000 square miles of seafloor across trenches distributed throughout the Pacific Rim. An area the size of Pennsylvania in total darkness, under crushing pressure. That is like being on the surface of a moon. Well, it is what I thought it would be. It is a steep freaking wall. The detail is unbelievable, almost entirely unvisited by any camera or submersible. If a few dozen square yards can support a complex structured ecosystem, what is living in the other 44,999 square miles? Nobody has looked. The behavior that broke the model. Even the scientists who accepted that some life might exist at full ocean depth had a fallback position. Whatever lived down there would be slow, minimizing energy expenditure in a place where food was nearly absent. Surviving, but only just. The amphipods in the footage were moving fast, competing, swarming. The same aggressive feeding behavior visible in shallow water species where food is plentiful and competition is fierce. Metabolic measurements from specimens retrieved from the trench confirmed what the footage suggested. These organisms were not running on minimal power. Their biochemistry was active, responsive, efficient. Here is the catch. That one observation broke a foundational assumption, and that assumption shapes everything. Which environments get studied, which planets get ruled out, which places we decide aren't worth looking at. If the deepest, darkest, coldest, highest pressure environment on Earth can support a fast, competitive, metabolically active ecosystem, the word uninhabitable has lost most of its scientific meaning. These animals weren't fighting to survive. They were adapted to those conditions so completely that those conditions were, to them, perfectly ordinary. 16,000 pounds per square inch, near freezing water, complete and permanent darkness, and they were going about their lives as if none of it required any adjustment. The cold wasn't cold to them. The pressure wasn't crushing. The darkness wasn't an absence. It was simply the world as they had always known it, and they were thriving in it, which raises the question the researchers on the pressure drop didn't want to ask out loud. If they are thriving, what are they, eating? An ecosystem. Nobody can explain. The deep ocean receives no energy from sunlight. The primary food source reaching the seafloor is marine snow, a slow drift of dead organisms, fecal material, and decomposed organic debris sinking from surface waters. Scientists who modeled the energy budget of Challenger Deep calculated that the volume of marine snow reaching the trench floor is nowhere near enough to support the abundance and diversity the cameras documented. So if you are on the surface and you are looking out and you can see all these lovely whales and dolphins and squid and jellyfish, all that stuff has to die. All that material, all that lovely organic matter sinks. And where does it sink? It sinks down to deeper depths, and it gets eaten by the deep sea below. The numbers don't balance. Something else is feeding this ecosystem, and nobody knows what it is. Possibilities include chemosynthetic bacteria drawing energy from chemicals in the Earth's crust, converting geological energy into biological fuel the way photosynthetic organisms convert sunlight. Unknown hydrothermal vent systems providing localized heat and chemical energy, or a form of nutrient recycling more efficient than anything observed in shallow water. Less waste, more complete processing, more biological output per unit of input, or something that hasn't been identified yet, an energy source nobody looked for, because until the limiting factor's cameras rolled, nobody believed anything down there needed feeding. Some researchers have proposed that deep-sea ecosystems may actually be more productive in certain respects than surface ecosystems. That what looks like scarcity from the outside may reflect a system that wastes almost nothing, which would invert one of our most basic assumptions about the ocean: the sunlit surface as the rich, productive zone, the deep as the barren afterthought. What if it is the other way around? What if the deep ocean is the primary marine habitat and the surface waters, volatile, temperature-dependent, seasonally unstable, are the marginal environment? One detail belongs in any honest accounting of this story. Among the footage from Challenger Deep, a plastic bag on the seafloor. Amphipod samples from the trench contain microplastics in their digestive systems. 7 miles down, already contaminated. These organisms survived 16,000 pounds per square inch for millions of years. They never evolved for what we put in the water, and we don't even know yet what else we have put down there that they are carrying. What the cameras didn't show. Everything described so far, the snailfish, the amphipods, the food webs, the unexplained energy balance, represents what was willing to be captured. The organisms that approached the lights. The species bold or hungry enough to enter camera range. It is, in a specific and important sense, a biased sample. The cameras show the most visible fraction of what lives down there. What they don't show is everything that stayed in the dark. The animals that don't approach bait, don't investigate unfamiliar light sources, have no evolutionary reason to come anywhere near a submersible. The footage also recorded what wasn't clearly captured, and that turns out to be the most significant part of it. Large disturbances in the sediment just outside the camera's reach. Movement that registered in the lights, but resolved into nothing by the time the frame caught up. Shadows at the edge of the illuminated zone that didn't correspond to any identified species. Shapes that crossed the field of view too quickly to catalog. The Mariana Trench is like an alien world right here on Earth, and every time scientists go down there, they find something new. In one expedition, they found many creatures nobody had ever documented before. One camera operator reviewing footage frame by frame noted repeated patterns of sediment displacement that appeared to track the submersible from outside the visible range. Whatever was moving kept pace. It didn't approach, it didn't retreat. It stayed at the edge of what the lights could reach and matched the camera's rhythm for several minutes before disappearing. Here is the math that follows from everything the cameras did show. If complex vertebrates, snailfish 8 to 10 inches long, can thrive at full ocean depth, what is the actual upper size limit for organisms living down there? The physics don't rule out larger animals. Pressure equalizes across a body, regardless of size. Larger animals store more energy reserves, a significant advantage in an ecosystem where food doesn't arrive on a predictable schedule. A large predator at full ocean depth would have no shortage of prey. Dense clouds of amphipods, foot-long sea cucumbers, fish swimming openly in water no surface predator can reach. An untouched food supply in complete darkness, available to anything large enough and adapted enough to exploit it. Vescovo, debriefing after the dive, described the moment the lights came on as the moment he understood the bottom of the ocean was not a place, it was a world. and he had been allowed to look at the edge of it for a few hours from inside a sealed sphere, barely wider than his own arms. The rest of that world, by his own account, was still dark. The shadows that don't match. Sonar surveys of the Mariana Trench have logged acoustic contacts that don't correspond to any known species. JAMSTEC, the Japanese Deep Ocean Research Agency that has run multiple Hadal Zone surveys since the early 2000s, has quietly recorded returns from large objects moving at depths where, according to every assumption that existed before the footage was shot, nothing that size should be present. NOAA hydrophone arrays monitoring the Western Pacific have picked up low-frequency signatures from the region that remain unclassified on the public record. These contacts have been consistently attributed to equipment errors or misidentified geological features. But the footage from the limiting factor proved that complex, diverse ecosystems exist at full ocean depth. The framework for dismissing those contacts no longer holds in the same way. Some of them may be biological, objects large enough to generate a significant sonar return. Things that move through the dark, don't approach lights, and have been down there far longer than we have been sending signals after them. Consider what those contacts would have to be. The snailfish, the largest confirmed vertebrate at full ocean depth, is 10 inches long. The sonar returns that don't match known species are not snailfish-sized. They are substantially larger than anything the footage captured. Beneath 1,000 meters, there is no light down there, but a lot of animals in those depths are bioluminescent. It is life that glows. It is home to the peak of biodiversity in the ocean. Moving through water 7 miles down in complete darkness, in an ecosystem science only confirmed existed a few years ago. The organisms that approached the cameras were the ones willing to approach the cameras. Whatever is generating those sonar returns is not approaching anything. The Mariana Trench covers thousands of square miles of seafloor. The full Hadal depth range, from 20,000 to 36,000 feet, spans approximately 45,000 square miles across trenches on the Pacific Rim, an area roughly the size of Pennsylvania, in total darkness, under crushing pressure, almost entirely unfilmed. What the cameras documented across a few dozen square yards of Challenger Deep is confirmed. Complex life thriving in conditions that were supposed to forbid it. The other 44,999 square miles haven't been looked at. Whatever is living in those unexplored trenches has been there for millions of years, evolving in complete isolation from the surface world, adapting to conditions no camera has recorded, in depths no submersible has reached, in a darkness that existed long before humans had a word for deep. The sonar contacts are still registering. The disturbances at the edge of the camera frame are still unidentified. The shadows are still moving through the dark at the bottom of the world. We don't know what they are. And the unsettling part isn't that we haven't found out yet. It is that we sent one camera to a few dozen square yards of a 45,000 square mile ecosystem, saw enough to break a century of assumptions, and largely haven't gone back. If that question is sitting with you, drop it in the comments. What do you think those sonar contacts are? And if you want to be here the next time we go this deep, subscribe now. The next video goes somewhere even the researchers weren't prepared.